At the time, I was a pretty young, idealistic programmer. I thought I was pretty good, but I had a lot to learn. I thought, there's a right way and a wrong way to develop software. You follow best practices, you figure out the right way to build it, and then you build it. And I was idealistic about the community and the mission. We were there to build this website for programmers to learn and share their knowledge. And it was working. The site was growing, so what's really to change? As I was there over the years, as the site grew, as I grew, I realized that Stack Overflow is more like a pile of contradictions. From a technical perspective, it is both a combination of brilliant technical design and a pile of ugly hacks. From a community perspective, it's a community where millions of people selflessly sign up and participate to help one another learn, wrapped up in an experience that often feels like it's trying hard not to help you. And so I realized that building and scaling a website like Stack Overflow is less about getting it right on the first try and more about iterating. It's about getting something out there that you know isn't perfect, learning from how it's working, and especially what's not working, and then having the courage to go back and rebuild the parts that aren't scaling anymore. So that's what I want to talk about. I want to talk about some of the lessons we've learned over the 10 years of building Stack Overflow. So first, a little bit about Stack Overflow. So quick show of hands, how many people here have ever used Stack Overflow? Okay, so you know what I'm talking about. So Stack Overflow every month gets over 500 million page views to the over 17 million questions on Stack Overflow. We help programmers with everything from the trivial to the absolutely mission critical. For example, here's one of the top questions on Stack Overflow. How to exit the Vim editor. This question has been viewed 1.8 million times, more than one of them by me. Those statistics, 500 million page views a month, represent more than just traffic and page views. They represent millions of developers helped and billions of hours saved. Every day, we're helping developers escape from Vim and saving them time. And if you think about it, that's what Stack Overflow does for you. It helps save you time and lets you get back to actually working on whatever you're working on. So the mission of Stack Overflow is to help everyone who codes learn and share their knowledge. We do that by empowering the community to ask and answer their own questions. I remember trying to explain this to my grandfather, who was a pretty smart guy, a doctor, but new to the internet. Yes, we run a question and answer website for programmers. No, that does not mean I spend all day asking and answering questions. No, we don't pay people to answer questions. Yes, they do it for free. Yes, millions of them every day. Well, actually, not for free. They do it for fake internet points and badges. You know what? Never mind. We do all of that scale on a pretty small architecture, a pretty small infrastructure, and a pretty small team. All of Stack Overflow runs on just 9 web servers, 4 SQL Server boxes, and a handful of back-end service boxes. Reaching that kind of scale required taking some creative shortcuts along the way. So, one of my favorite examples from the early days of Stack Overflow, tag searching. So every question on Stack Overflow has up to 5 tags, usually representing the technologies involved in the question. So JavaScript, Node.js, JSON. Pretty common thing on a lot of pages, basically every page on the site, is we want to slice and dice the list of questions on Stack Overflow by those tags. So you might want to search for questions tagged JavaScript and JSON, but not Node.js if you're a front-end JavaScript developer. So this is the feature. You want to build this feature on Stack Overflow. It's early days. It's a tiny startup, just 3 people at the time, 3 programmers. How would you build that? If you're like young, naive me, you'd look at that and you'd think, OK, I'm going to build a nice relational database structure. We're going to have posts. We're going to have tags. I'm going to have a one-to-many relationship between them. And then I'm going to write some complicated SQL generation code to query across those tables, join across those tables, include and exclude to get the right list of questions. If you're the programmer who actually built this, you take a different approach. So this is how it works. This is actually using the SQL full text index. Turns out Microsoft SQL Server comes with a built-in full text search index. This is meant to search bodies of text, right? So it does things like stemming and tokenizing and things like that. But tags kind of look like words, and it already has a feature to include and exclude certain words, so it works. This is a nice quick little hack. instead of the way I would have built it, which would have taken a couple weeks and performance tuning, this is something you could get done in a day. Small problem. Because it's expecting words, it doesn't quite know what to do with special characters. So the sharp in C#, the plus in C++, it just strips those out. And so those would all just become C, which means it's impossible to search on those tags. Now, if you're the programmer working on this, you might take this as a sign that maybe you're abusing the full-text search index in a way that it wasn't really designed to be used, or you might just hack around it. Let's just take some of those letters that we're not really using, and we'll just swap those in, and boom, search is done. Problem solved, great. I remember seeing this for the first time. You actually see these tags in the database. There's a special tags field where all the letters have been swapped out, and thinking, this is either crazy or brilliant, because this is totally the opposite of how I would develop software. And so there's something really interesting going on here with this sort of early startup mindset of get it out quickly, and then we'll iterate on it over time. So this worked for a couple years. Stack Overflow is growing, it's getting bigger, and this is literally how tag search works. Slight problem. One day, my boss, Joel, comes to me and says, hey, we should localize. Let's have Stack Overflow in Portuguese. Uh-oh. Now we need some of those characters that we were using to swap in for special tokens. All right, time to rebuild the whole thing. But the team is bigger now. We have more time, we have more people, and we actually have the time to build it right. And actually, the way that we rebuild it isn't the way I would have built it in the first place at all. We rebuild the whole thing as an in-memory data structure that can do really fast intersections and unions across these tags, this highly efficient tag data, and that's how it works to this day. So this was an early hack. It got us through the early days. It was something we could get out quickly, and then it was something we could pretty easily rip out and rebuild. And crucially, at the time when we rebuild it, we know more, we have more resources, and we build it better than we might have the first time if we'd tried to build it the right way, right out of the gate. Another hack, this one a little more complicated. So Stack Overflow, when it started, is a single website for programmers to ask and answer programming questions. A few months in, we decided we wanted to have a section for sysadmins. Now, we had this idea then that every kind of community should have its own space, its own site, where they can sort of set some of their own rules and community standards, and so we didn't want the questions to be mixed in. So we wanted to have a separate subsection for sysadmins. Again, you might look at this and think, okay, so what we need to do is refactor the app to allow for subsections within one shared database. Or you might look at this and say, let's just copy-paste the whole application, spin up another database, another domain, and boom, server fault is born. Of course, we can't stop just there. We start with Stack Overflow, we add server fault, we add superuser, we start adding other sites on math and cooking and gaming, and more sites on webmastering and photography, until today, the Stack Exchange network, as we call it, is 173 different sites. Now, as you can imagine, we run into some issues with this architecture along the way. For example, let's say you sign up on Stack Overflow, and then you go to one of these other sites and you want to join. Well, because it's a separate application, a separate database, it has no idea who you are, so you have to register all over again. That's fine. Registering takes 30 seconds, no big deal. You go to the next site. Annoyingly, it doesn't know who you are again. You have to register all over again. You do this a few times, but it's kind of a one-time cost. Well, let's say now the day comes where you want to update your profile picture. Well, now you've got to go visit 173 different sites and upload your picture over and over again. And as you can imagine, on the back end, we're duplicating all of that data over and over again. So we have to work around this. We have to build we end up hacking around the hack, essentially. So we have to build some complicated code to build a message queue to sync data across databases. That's not working so well either. Okay, we got to hoist all of the profile data out to a separate shared profiles data database. And that's basically how it works today. So building and scaling a site like Stack Overflow is about shortcuts and about figuring out what are the right shortcuts to take. There's no easy answer to this, but I think one of the things that I've learned is that the kind of shortcuts that are easy to undo are ones that are purely technical. They're hidden on the back end, and they're not exposed to users. So the early hack with the tag search index, that one actually, I think, worked out okay. It got us through the early days, it scaled okay, and then we were able to replace it when it wasn't working anymore. A hack like the multi-site architecture, that one's a little messier because it actually starts to impact the user experience and constrain what the product can do. And so because it affects users and changes how they interact, it's much harder to change. So things that are purely technical, generally relatively easy to undo. Things that are affecting users, those are the hacks that are much harder. And that's what brings us to the community. While we've been pretty good at scaling Stack Overflow from a technical perspective, scaling the community has been a lot harder. All of Stack Overflow works because of the power of community. We harness the knowledge of millions of developers to ask, answer, vote, and moderate all of our content. But the kinds of things that work when you're scaling a community of a few hundred or a few thousand break down when you scale that up to millions and millions of developers. The biggest thing you start to lose is a sense of empathy. Because when your community is small and you see the same users over and over again, you sort of know them as people, or you see them as people. And so when someone makes a mistake, they don't get the rules exactly right, you give them the benefit of the doubt, you help them learn the ropes. But when it's millions of people and new users are coming every day and making the same mistakes over and over again, you start to lose that sense of empathy. One of the places this shows up is in the comments on questions. A comment like this. You could literally Google this in 5 seconds. This is a pretty common sentiment on Stack Overflow. From a certain perspective, it's literally true, right? You could Google it if you knew what to search for. The problem is a new user or somebody who's just new to a programming language or a framework, they don't know the terms to search for. And so you've got a mismatch between the person who's asking the question and the person who's answering, who looks at it and says, oh, this is easy. Why is this so hard for you? But this is a culture that, unfortunately, we've sort of helped to create. Because Stack Overflow has long had this sort of perspective or this philosophy, this idea that being right is more important than being helpful. And this is a kind of shortcut. It's not that we intended to create that, but it comes out of this culture of what's the right answer? You know, what exactly are you saying, and is that technically correct or not? And so you build up this culture, and it's a kind of shortcut because it's easier to make rules about things that are black and white. Is this allowed or not allowed? Is this kind of language okay or not okay? It's much harder to make rules about, is this comment helpful? Are you being empathetic? Are you being kind? Are you being welcoming? And so we sort of just set that to the side for a while at the beginning and said, let's just focus on what's allowed and what's not allowed. And we got really good at filtering those things and moderating those things in and out. But we had a lot more trouble scaling the community to figure out, you know, is this a helpful comment? Is this a welcoming comment or not? In some ways, this goes back to a sort of foundational question of Stack Overflow, which is, who is it for and who are we building for? We had this idea in the early days that Stack Overflow is for professional programmers. This is pragmatic. It's, again, a shortcut. When you're building a startup, you have to choose who's your target user. Who are you building for? Are you building for somebody who's brand new to coding and just learning to code? Or are you really aiming for the people who already know how to code but have lots of complex technical questions every day? And so we deliberately said we're going to build Stack Overflow for the latter group, for the professional programmers. And that's really the site that we built and the culture that we've created to this day. And that works when you're a small startup, when you're just getting this community going, but it becomes disastrous when you become a de facto tool for the entire industry. Because if you're a new programmer and you're just learning how to code, a natural place to go is Stack Overflow. You have a lot of questions. You need help. But if you go to Stack Overflow and your experience is you ask your question and you're told, you know, you're not really doing it the right way, or this is too simple, we don't answer that kind of question, the message you're getting isn't about some, you know, technical detail of who we're here to help and who we're not. It feels more like a statement from the entire industry that we don't want you here, you're not trying hard enough, you're not smart enough, you don't belong here. And that's disastrous for us as a community because it means we're not bringing in that next generation of programmers to help ask and answer questions. It's even worse for the industry because this disproportionately affects and hurts people from underrepresented groups. Because those people are receiving so many messages every day that they look around and they see this is an industry where people don't look like me, sound like me, talk like me, think like me, have the same experience as me. Do I really belong? And they're receiving all of these signals that say, maybe you don't belong. And then they go to Stack Overflow, and they receive another message that says, you didn't try hard enough, you didn't ask in exactly the right way, and that just adds to the avalanche of signals that they're getting that maybe this isn't the place for them. And in an industry when so many are doing so much good work to bring new people in, to diversify the industry, Stack Overflow too often is part of the problem instead of being part of the solution. This is something that really matters to us because we believe that developers are writing the script for the future. And so if our industry stays where it is and stays a non-representative group of the world, we're building software for the entire world. We're building software that impacts billions of people's lives, and that software is written by a developer, and if those developers aren't representing a broad diversity of viewpoints and backgrounds and experience, then we're not going to build the right things. So this is a problem that we're really thinking a lot about at Stack Overflow. In a way, we're thinking about how to refactor a community. To take a community and a product that were built for a narrow set of use cases and broaden it, widen it to more users, more use cases. So this is a hard problem, and we're thinking about it in a few ways. But one of the first things that we're taking aim at is those unwelcoming comments on posts. This year, we rolled out a new code of conduct, which emphasizes not just what you can and can't say, but values and principles like kindness, collaboration, and mutual respect. It gives examples of unhelpful comments like, you could Google this in 5 seconds, and then a helpful version of it that tells you, here's a better way to phrase that, or a better way to say that, which isn't, you could Google this in 5 seconds, it's, here's what to Google for. This is called invariance and covariance, and you can Google this and find great resources. Or even better, here are some Stack Overflow answers that already talk about this. So it teaches you how to take something that is not helpful and turn it into something that's helpful. The second thing we did is we added a way to enforce the code of conduct. We already had the concept of flagging comments. We added a new flag kind, which just says it's unfriendly or unkind. We already had flagging that flagged something as abusive or harassment, and that worked pretty well. There's not a lot of outright bigotry and abuse on Stack Overflow. But what we heard from users was that when they saw something that was unkind or sarcastic or unhelpful, they didn't necessarily want to flag it as abuse or harassment. That sounded too harsh. So we just added another option which says it's unfriendly or unkind, and overnight the number of those flags coming in skyrocketed. The third thing we added was a new contributor indicator. This is just a little indicator that pops up under the user card from when somebody asks their first few posts. And it's just a reminder to the community that this person's new here. They're still learning the ropes. They're still getting used to the site. So give them a chance. Give them a little bit more benefit of the doubt. Help them learn the ropes. These 3 changes rolled out pretty closely together. And the net result was that new unkind comments coming in dropped by about 1/3. So we still have a lot of work to do. And we've got a lot more ideas for where to take this and more things that we can do. But we're already making progress. The second thing we thought about is, how do we broaden Stack Overflow to allow more types of content, more types of questions that don't really fit on Stack Overflow right now? Stack Overflow is a public community. It's a public website. Everything you ask on it is visible to the entire internet. But if you think about it, every developer has lots of questions that don't really belong on the public internet. Most developers work on a team with a private code base. And so you have questions every day that are relevant to the people on your team and people working on that same code base that don't make sense for the entire internet. You know, how do I build and compile this code? Who do I talk to about this? Why did we build it this way and not that way? These are all the kinds of questions that people on a team have all the time, but you can't ask them on the public internet. For a long time, for years actually, we had companies coming to us and asking us, can we get a private version of Stack Overflow? And we turned them away because we said, that's not our use case. We're here to build public communities. This is what we do. This is what we're good at. Sorry, we can't help you. Well, not anymore. Last year, we launched Stack Overflow for Teams, which for the first time gives people a way to create a private space on Stack Overflow, secure, where they can ask and answer questions that are only visible to people on their team. Within 6 months, over 1,000 companies had signed up. And most exciting to me, over 90% of the users who joined a team didn't previously have a Stack Overflow account. That means we are actually achieving our goal of bringing new people in, of giving them a place where they could participate in the mission of Stack Overflow, of sharing their knowledge with one another, who maybe didn't feel comfortable or able or interested in participating on the public website. Now they can come and participate in a private, safe space. So what do all these things have in common? To me, what they have in common is a willingness to go back and revisit old decisions, to take a hard look at data and feedback that maybe you don't want to hear, and question some of the decisions you made. This can be hard because those are the decisions that made you who you are today, and in some ways made us successful. But we have to be willing to listen to what people are saying and to change. In the same way that we have to be willing to, as we look at technical problems, recognize that the systems we built for a small scale aren't going to work at a large scale. It comes down to asking the right questions and listening to the answers that you get, which is something you'd think we'd be good at since we run a question and answer website. So wherever you are, whatever your background, whether you're a senior tech leader or you're brand new to coding, whether you feel like tech is your home or you feel like you're fighting just to find a place in this industry, we want you to know that Stack Overflow has a place for you. And whether your question is about how to use Git, the complexities of Haskell, or even about Chuck Norris, Stack Overflow has a place for you, and you're welcome here. Thank you.